Chapter 9 Danger in the Desert by Magpie Quilk. Love's a funny old thing, don't you think? One of the greatest unsolved mysteries of the world, if you ask me. I mean, I've never been much of a romantic, if I'm perfectly honest. I'm not your slushy, soppy sentimentalist by any stretch of the imagination. True enough, I've always been a bit of a ladies' man. I can't help it, really. Charm and charisma just ooze out of me, whether I like it or not. But I've never been your whimsical, starry-eyed dreamer, looking and longing and craving for love as though it's the only thing worth having. No, it leapt on me quite unawares, if truth be told. It grabbed hold of me from an altogether unexpected direction. This is the story of how yours truly, namely Magpie Quilk, Esquire, came to be seized, caught and overpowered by the mysterious forces of love. I suppose I should start with a bit of context, really, shouldn't I? If they taught us one thing in school, it's how to write down your memoirs. It seems to be an incurable Galamine trait for some reason or other. We all want to make a written record of our most memorable experiences. There's a distinctive Galamine style to it, you know, and they always told us to start with a bit of background. You've got to set the scene, as they say. Well then, it all happened in the dreary deserts of Macaria in the year 1285. War was raging with our old foes the Grochukans, and 12 of us had escaped from an enemy fortress called Grukengalga. There were only 9 of us left by now. One of us had turned out to be an enemy spy, one got left behind in another fortress, and the other had lost his life in the jungles of Mesonestia. Getting out of that jungle had been a narrow thing, as it happens. The entire southern border had been positively swarming with enemy troops. We were very lucky to get past them all in one piece. We did have a significant advantage, mind, a guerrilla. In the end, we made a charge for it, burst our way through a group of unsuspecting soldiers, javelins firing forth in all directions, and found ourselves in the kingdom of Macaria. Anyway, I'm going off on tangents now, aren't I? Always stick to your main story, that's what I was always told. So then, there we were in the land of Macaria, right on the edge of an enormous scorching desert.
"This is going to be most unpleasant,"
said Slanky Boy, tall fellow with a little moustache and a bowler hat.
"I can't stand the heat, I can't," said Tando, despondent chap with greasy brown hair. "Makes me head go all funny."
"At least we'll be safe from the enemy," said Monty, our honourable leader. "I don't think they'll risk coming too far over the border."
And so we began. We stepped down from the hard grey rocks of the borderlands and onto the burning sands of the desert. On the plus side, it would be nice to be out in the open at last. No chance of anyone creeping up on us by surprise. On the minus side, there was absolutely no shelter from the sweltering heat of the sun. I tried putting my hood up over my head, but it didn't really do much good, if I'm honest. It was Slanky Boy who had the biggest advantage over us. I'd always thought his bowler hat looked pretty daft before, but now I could see it had a point. Our biggest problem was going to be water. We had no idea how far we'd have to go before we struck upon some more. At least we had plenty of grub with us. Mr. Salvastro, a spy we'd met in the jungle, had acquired copious provisions from an enemy fortress. Shame we didn't have him or his guerrilla any more, though. Having got us safely into Macaria, he saw his mission as accomplished and melted away into the shadows. Mr. Ramkhan, a blonde bloke from Boromir, said he'd been to Macaria before, though, so we appointed him as our guide. I'm not all that keen on Boromians, if truth be told. Don't get me wrong, I'm sure they're lovely people once you get to know them, and it's a great thing to have them as our allies. It's just they're all so terribly stern and solemn. They take life far too seriously, if you ask me. Anyway, I'm drifting from my point again, aren't I? Where was I? Yes, we were trekking unhappily along across the desert.
"I can't wait till nightfall," said Tando. "I don't know how much more of this relentless sun I can bear."
"Where are we going to sleep, General?"
asked the Jagster, quirky professor who dabbles in Halvurandy.
"I don't much fancy a night out in the open."
"You're right there, Professor," said Tando. "Not with sand snakes and scorpions creeping about."
"Any suggestions, Mr. Ramkhan?"
asked Monty.
"There should be a small settlement not far away," said Ramkhan. "We may well be finding shelter there, and water too, I am hoping."
The prospect of water and shelter certainly lifted my spirits, but little did I know what else I'd find in that settlement. On and on and on we trudged, with very little in the way of conversation to distract from the unbearable heat and monotony. Understandably, I think we were all pretty choked by the death of Mr. Volko, the one we'd lost in the jungle. He'd been killed the day before by a shot to the stomach, and we'd had to bury him there in the jungle. It was pretty crushing to think we hadn't all made it here alive. It had certainly dampened the joy of breaking past the enemy ambush. If anything, though, it was amazing no more of us had lost our lives. We've had more than our fair share of peril, what with pirates and alkers and hesperikes and venomous bats and all sorts of other deadly dangers. The fact that 10 of us were still alive and 9 had made it so far was really quite remarkable. But I keep going off on tangents, don't I? I really must show a bit more restraint. Well then, there we were, trooping on towards Ram Khan's settlement, getting hotter and thirstier and wearier by the minute.
"What are the Makarians like?" asked Tando, finally breaking the silence. "Will they be friendly?"
"They're a fierce and unpleasant people," said Monty. "Officially, they're neutral in the war at the moment, but I'm curious why they allowed all those Grochukans to patrol their border. It makes me rather suspicious."
"You mean they could be secretly helping the enemy?" said Hectus, soppy fellow with a big mop of hair.
"I don't know about that," said Monty, "but they've never been all that keen on us Galamines."
"Are there any other peoples in the country?" asked Hectus.
"I fear so," said the Jagster. "We are in the land of the Obedines now. Here and Galvia are the last of their strongholds. You would call them giants, I think."
"Just as I thought we were getting away from danger," said Tando. "Typical."
"Look," said Ram Khan, pointing forwards. "There on the horizon. It is our settlement, I believe. The town of Aokar."
"Splendid," said Slanky Boy. "I can't wait to be out of this atrocious heat."
Half an hour later, we came at last to the edge of Aokar. It wasn't exactly the most impressive sight I'd ever set eyes on. A right miserable, shabby-looking place if ever there was one. The streets were dirty, dusty and unswept, the houses were cracked and crumbling, and the people looked downright unhappy and dishevelled. What with the endless heat, threat of giants and grotty towns, I'm certainly glad I don't have to live in Makaria. It's a far cry from the rolling hills and valleys of Galamenia. There was one thing, though, that stood out sharply from everything else. Right bang in the middle of the town was an enormous great big palace made of gleaming white stone, with gurgling fountains and massive marble pillars. It was the only decent-looking place in the entire settlement. Thankfully, we didn't seem to attract much attention as we tramped along the streets, and eventually we came to a reasonable-looking inn called the Parched and Peckish. The name sounded promising, so we all filed inside and gathered round the desk where an old lady was busily writing notes into a book.
"Good afternoon, madam," said Monty, shouting ever so slightly. He can't help it, really. It's in his nature. "We're looking for a place to stay for the night."
The old lady glanced up from her work and eyed us up and down suspiciously.
"You are not Makarians, I see," she frowned.
"Indeed we are not," said the General. "We are Galamines."
The old lady sniffed dismissively and returned to her work.
"Well, madam," said Monty after an awkward silence, "do you have enough beds for us?"
The old lady looked up again and silently counted the number of intruders, a look of severe disgust appearing on her face.
"I can offer you 2 rooms of 5, she said grumpily. "You'll have to pay for the extra bed, mind."
"That'll suit us admirably," said Monty.
"Here are your keys, then,"
she grunted, taking down a bunch from the wall behind her.
"That'll be 20 golds altogether."
Monty grabbed hold of the keys and handed over the money. Salvastro had given us a fair bit from his stash. The woman gave us one last disapproving look, grimaced, and returned once again to her work. Unsure of exactly where to go, we started to wander down one of the corridors.
"Upstairs,"
she sighed drearily.
"What a miserable old woman,"
said Mackie Boy, a grouchy old innkeeper. "I don't think much of Makarian hospitality."
"She didn't seem to approve of foreigners," said Slank. "I'm afraid they're a rather prejudiced lot, these Makarians."
"At least we're out of the burning sunshine," said Monty. "We'll make an early night of it, shall we? Then set off before sunrise to avoid the heat of the day. Sleep well, everyone, sleep well. You all deserve a decent night's rest."
It didn't half feel good to have a proper bed again. The room may have been a bit grubby, the mattress worn and the wallpaper pretty appalling, but it was far better than tree branches and prison cells. What with a super feast courtesy of Mr. Salvastro, and my first decent cuppa since leaving Galamenia, I hadn't felt so good in ages. I leaned back against a generous selection of fluffy pillows, happy and content as could be. "What's that you got there, Algy?" I asked. Algovian, a chubby fellow with curly brown hair, was thumbing through a bundle of papers. "It's the last letter of Mr. Volko," he said. "I helped him write it in his final hours." "Looks pretty long," I remarked. "It's very detailed," said Algy. "I think he wanted to leave a permanent record of his last days, for his family and such. He asked me to give it to his wife."
"I am grieved we are unable to be saving him," said Ram Khan. "He was a brave and honourable soldier."
"I blame myself, really," said Monty mournfully. "If only I'd trusted Mr. Salvastro, none of this would ever have happened."
"You mustn't be so hard on yourself, sir," said Slanky. "You were merely exercising due caution. There was no way of determining the veracity of Mr. Salvastro's claims. You did as you deemed best."
"I put men's lives in jeopardy, Slank," said Monty. "If we'd gone to the coast, we'd never have run into Barracus. Volko would still be with us."
"You weren't the only one unwilling to believe Mr. Salvastro," said Slanky. "Half of us agreed with you, sir."
"It's not the first time I've made the wrong decision, though, is it?" said the General. "You know that as well as anyone, Slank. I can't help wondering whether I am a little too old for this now. I think perhaps I ought to consider retiring. I'm getting past it, Slank."
"Every leader makes mistakes, sir," said Slanky. "You mustn't reproach yourself."
"Mistakes, Slank?" said
Monty, raising his voice.
"Mistakes? A man has died because of my blundering. I've been a stupid, pompous, self-righteous old fool. I'm a disgrace to the army. I'm unfit for service."
"You exaggerate, sir," said Slank. "You have a proud and distinguished record. It is written in the Irondia."
"Don't quote the Irondia to me, Slank," shouted Monty. "I'm sick and tired of your endless proverbs. I'm going to take some air."
With that, the General leapt up from his bed and stormed out of the room. "Poor fellow," said Algy. "He's a heavy burden on his shoulders leading us lot. I don't envy him one bit."
"A breath of fresh air will soon calm him down," said Slanky. "Then we can all have a final cup of tea and settle down for the night."
"Plenty of tea left, is there?" I asked Ram Khan, who had taken charge of provisions.
"Enough for one more each, I am thinking," he replied. "I fear things are not lasting long with 9 mouths to satisfy."
"How are we doing on the old food front?" I asked.
"Not too bad," said Ram Khan. "We are having enough for several more days, but we shall have to be stocking up again at some point."
"Maybe quite a while till we reach a place like this again," I said. "I reckon we should strike while we've got the chance. Never miss an opportunity, I say. I think I'll pay a visit to that palace we saw. Home of the local troop, no doubt. Must be plenty of grub in there, I reckon." "But that'd be stealing, Quilk," said Algy. "It's one thing taking from the enemy, but I draw the line at that. The Macarians are neutral." "Didn't help get rid of them soldiers, did they?" I replied. "The General seems to think they're siding with the Empire." "It isn't noble," said Algothian, taking a moral stand. "Theft is theft, Quilk." "They ain't exactly noble themselves, are they?" I said. "They're all the same, those troops, living in luxury in their fancy marble palaces, while the rest of the town rots away in squalor. It's disgusting, really. They need to be taught a lesson, if you ask me."
In the end, I managed to persuade young Hectus to accompany me, and as darkness fell over Macaria, we sneaked out into the street and skulked our way towards the palace. The streets were pretty much deserted by then, apart from the odd beggar or two, so it was no great challenge getting to our target. The real problem would be entering the palace itself. Thankfully, I'm an old hand at gaining access to all manner of buildings, so if anyone had a chance of getting in, I was your man. I packed a little box of trusty tools and implements, so I was pretty optimistic. The first task would be getting over the wall. It was about 12 feet high, 10 inches thick, lined with 2 rows of nasty-looking spikes and patrolled by a dozen guards. To any ordinary mortal it was insurmountable, but Mr. Magpie Quilk is no ordinary fellow. "Right then, Hectus, here's the plan," I said. "Your job will be to distract the guards. I want you to walk all nonchalantly past the guard at the gate, and once you get over to that tree over there, cry out in pain as if you're struck by some deadly affliction. Drop to the ground, clutch your stomach, and writhe around in agony. That'll draw the guard away from the gate, and hopefully one or two others with him. While they're all crouched down, attending to you on the ground, I shall skilfully relieve one of them of his keys, unlock the gate, and let myself in." "And how will I get in?" asked Hectus. "Easy," I replied. "Every 10 minutes or so, the guard at the gate goes for a little wander further down the wall. Now's your opportunity to sidle up to the gate and knock on the bars. I'll be waiting there to let you in. He doesn't turn his back for long, mind, so you'll have to be quick." "Are you sure it'll work?" asked Hectus. "Course it will," I smiled. "Piece of cake. Don't you worry yourself, mate. We'll be fine." "But is it right, Mr. Quilk?" he asked. "It seems a lot like stealing to me." "Listen, mate," I said. "These Macarian troops are about as corrupt and depraved as they come. As well as stocking up on our own provisions, we'll make a generous donation to the local populace. Now you can't say fairer than that. Come on then, Hectus. Time to play your part." As you might expect, given the infallible brilliance of the plan, everything went extremely smoothly. True, Hector's cringe-inducingly awful overacting did raise an anxious moment or two, but in the end, all was well. I effortlessly snatched the keys from an unsuspecting guard's pocket, slid through the gate, and shortly afterwards admitted my assistant. We trotted briskly down the courtyard, climbed through an open window, and found ourselves in a small bedroom.
"A guest room, no doubt," I reassured Hectus. "No sign of anyone sleeping in here. Now comes the tricky bit, though. We've no way of knowing who or what is behind that door."
"It's all very exciting," said Hectus. "It's like being a spy or something."
"I can't hear any voices," I remarked, pressing my ear against the bedroom door. "I think the coast is clear." Nervously and cautiously, and I have to admit with a noticeable quickening of my heartbeat, I turned the handle of the door and pushed it slowly open. I poked my head outside and carefully scrutinised the long dark corridor beyond. "Come on, Hectus," I said. "Out we go. Looks like the place is empty. Now then, let's try one of these doors and see what we can find."
"I can't wait to tell Amarella all about this," said Hectus. "Breaking into the palace of a trouk. I never thought I'd end up doing something like this."
"What about this one, mate?" I said, pointing to a small green door. "Can't hear anyone on the other side. Let's have a peek, shall we?" I nudged the door slightly open and anxiously peered in through the crack. It was then that I saw something truly unexpected. 6 people were sitting round a table eating their dinner. Nothing extraordinary about that, of course. But there, on the far side of the room, sat none other than the delectable Miss Felicia. Miss Felicia of Glasstock is quite simply the most exquisitely beautiful woman I have ever set eyes on. I defy anyone to name a woman with a more intoxicating smile or a more gorgeous complexion. Not that she's just a pretty face, mind. She's spectacularly intelligent, impressively quick-witted, and absolutely charming company. All in all, she's a most beguiling young lady. I first met Miss Felicia in the Great Grotrucan Forest, just a few days after our escape from Grucengolga. She'd been on her way to Macaria, which explained her presence now, when we'd commandeered her wagon, killed her escort, and taken her as a prisoner. Despite her being a Grotrucan, I must confess that I was more than a little smitten with her, though Slanky Boy didn't exactly approve. There seemed to be a natural rapport between us, but it wasn't all that long before we were whisked away in dead of night by a fellow named Clestus. Well, to cut a long story short, I found myself brought before the Emperor Morbrond, thrown into prison, and promptly rescued by the enthralling Miss Felicia. All in all, I have to admit I was well and truly bowled over by her. And now here she was in front of me again, looking even more outrageously beautiful than I'd remembered.
"Anyone in there, Mr. Quilk?"
whispered Hectus. "A handful of dignitaries," I replied, "and a certain adorable young woman. You'll never guess who, mate. None other than Miss Felicia."
"She got here safely, then," said Hectus. "I'm glad about that. She was a nice girl, wasn't she? Where shall we try next, then?"
Reluctantly, I pulled myself away from the door and advanced a little further down the corridor. How about this one? Said Hectus, about to open a narrow yellow one. Easy does it, mate, I called sharply. Nice and gently, Hectus, nice and gently. There could be someone standing right behind it. I'm terribly sorry, Mr. Quilk, he apologised. I'm not used to this sort of thing. Ease it open, then, I instructed, nice and carefully. Wow! Cried my partner excitedly. Take a look at this, Mr. Quilk. I've never seen so much food in all my days. Fantastic! Voice down, Hectus, I snapped. I think I heard footsteps. I strained my ears and listened intently, and sure enough, there was definitely someone drawing slowly towards us. We magpies have always been celebrated for our exceptional hearing. Quick, I ordered, in the larder. There's someone coming round the corner. We hurriedly dived inside and closed the door firmly behind us. We were in total darkness. There were no windows in the room or cracks in the door, so there wasn't a single speck of light. Thankfully there was a handle on the inside of the door, so at least we weren't trapped. All we could do was hold our nerve, wait patiently, and hope that the owner of the footsteps passed by soon. There was a tantalising smell of freshly baked food in the air. Most distinctly, the appetising aroma of cakes and buns and pastries and biscuits. So if we managed to get out of this situation unseen, we'd be in for a right treat. But time seemed to stand still as we stood there in the dark, sweating by the bucket load and barely daring to breathe. The footsteps had stopped, but there was no other clue as to what the owner was up to. Presumably he must have been standing just outside, waiting for something or other. The tension was unbearable. And then came the moment we'd been dreading. We heard the handle turning slowly and light flooded in. We found ourselves staring into the face of a somewhat startled-looking cook, who immediately called for guards in the loudest and shrillest of tones. I promptly knocked him to the ground with my deadly right hook. I can pack quite a powerful punch when I need to. Leapt over his body and zoomed off down the corridor. Guards came pouring out of doorways in every direction, but stubbornly I kept my course and sped away through the maze of innavigable corridors. Noble though my valiant flight may have been, it wasn't enough to evade the clutches of Macarius' finest, and I ended up being pinned to the floor by 6 burly soldiers.
You are a spy, accused one particularly gargantuan fellow.
I ain't no spy, I pleaded. I'm a Galamine soldier. You'd better treat me with a little more decorum, gents.
If you are not a spy, then what are you doing in the palace? One of them asked.
Stealing, I confessed, hoping to disarm them with my honesty. Thoroughly disgraceful activity, I know, but not half as bad as spying. I'm no expert on Macarian law, but I'm pretty sure thieving ain't a capital offence.
Correct, said the first fellow. But you can still be severely punished. We'll see what His Magnificence has to say. Put him in the cells for now. What is your name, young man?
Magpie Quilk, I smiled, extending my hand. Pleased to meet you. Well, not all that pleased, if I'm brutally honest.
Do not expect any clemency or leniency, Mr. Quilk, said the soldier. You have broken into the palace of a Trook. It is a very serious crime in Macaria. You'll get none of your Galamine softness here. Put them away, men.
5 minutes later, I was flung into a little holding cell, where I found my companion Hectus sitting in the corner looking somewhat glum. It was the 4th time I'd been incarcerated in the space of 2 months, what with Golga, Kendam and Ulcus. Still, I'd never been behind bars for all that much time. You can't keep Magpie Quilk locked up for long. This time we were in a bright, clean cubic cell about 7 feet in diameter, with a large door of iron bars separating us from the corridor outside. Cheer up, mate, I said to Hectus. Getting out of prison's becoming a habit of ours. We won't be here long, Hectus. Old Monty'll come along soon and free us. I hope so, said Hectus. But our good fortune's got to run out sometime. At least we're fairly comfortable, though. The Macarians ain't as savage as the Grotrucans, I told him. They won't treat us too badly. We'll be here a night and a day at most, I reckon. At least the others knew where we were going, said Hectus. Maybe the General would do a deal with them. Exactly, I said. Positive thinking, Hectus. I heard the sound of a bolt being drawn, turned around, and saw that the door of the outer corridor had been opened. And who do you think walked in? You've guessed it, the beautiful Miss Felicia. I heard we'd caught a Galamine thief, she said, smiling delightfully. I thought it might be you. Felicia, I grinned. What a pleasant surprise. Have you come to rescue us?
Rescue you, she replied, quietly closing the door. I can't do that. Last time your life was in danger, but this time, well, they've caught you fair and square, haven't they?
My motives were purely charitable, I said.
Oh, yes, she said. You were doing the Trook a favour, were you?
Quite the opposite, I answered. I was going to do the people a favour. Have you seen how they live outside those walls? It's disgusting.
I never took you for a revolutionary, she said. It seems I misjudged you.
I'm a man of many layers, I told her. I've got hidden depths. Come on then, Felicia. Are you going to give us the keys or not? You know you want to.
I can't, she insisted. Do you know what would happen if they caught me? It's a very serious offence, helping prisoners to escape.
I've got faith in you, Felicia, I said. You've got talent, subtlety, style, grace. You won't get caught.
Flattery will get you nowhere, she said, her smile suggesting otherwise. I'll put in a good word for you with the Troop, though. Say you helped me back in the Empire. I can't do any more than that, though, honestly.
You disappoint me, Felicia, I said. You break my heart.
No need to get all melodramatic, she replied with thinly veiled affection. What's happened to all your friends, anyway?
They're all in the town, I said. They're staying at the Parched and Peckish. I'll tell you what, you couldn't slip 'em a message, could you? Let them know what's happened to us.
So they can help you to escape, you mean?
Naturally. Would I hide anything from you, Felicia?
I'll think about it. I'd better go now, though. I'm expected at the Trook's ball.
The Trook's ball, eh? We are moving in exalted circles, aren't we? Well, I shall eagerly await your response, Miss Felicia. By the way, I'm loving what you've done with your hair. You look spectacular.
Enough of the flattery, she said, blushing ever so slightly. I'll see you both later. Goodbye, Mr. Hectus. Goodbye, Quilk.
She hurriedly made her way back to the door, opened it, and to my delight she glanced back round again, shook her head in mock disdain, and left me with the most wonderful smile imaginable. Blinding, ain't she? I said to Hectus. Absolutely stunning.
She's very attractive, agreed Hectus, discerning fellow, though not half as beautiful as Amarella.
She quite blatantly fancies me, doesn't she? I said. It's pretty obvious, really.
Does she?
Said Hectus, looking a little puzzled.
How can you tell?
It's all about the body language, mate, I said. The movement of the eyes, subtle expressions of the face, the way she plays with her hair. You can't blame her, really, though. I mean, she's been surrounded by Grochukans all her life, and then suddenly she meets yours truly. What other outcome could there be?
You're very sure of yourself, aren't you, Mr. Quilk? Said Hectus with half a smile. Half the time I don't know whether to take you seriously or not. Personally, I've never been able to tell what women are thinking. They're just so impossible to read. I can never tell what Amarella really thinks of me. Sometimes I think she likes me. Other times I'm convinced she can't stand me.
You just have to take the talking by the horns, won't you, mate? I said. Ask her outright, straight and direct.
I intend to, said Hectus. Trouble is, it'll all come out wrong. I can guarantee it. I can never get my words out right when I'm looking at her. It's hopeless.
You need a bit of self-confidence, mate, I said. You've got plenty going for you. Decent job, good education, friendly personality, gallant war hero. Don't be so insecure about yourself.
Do you think Felicia will help us to escape then? Asked Hectus.
She'll come round, I assured him. You never know. I may even persuade her to run away with us.
Are you serious? Said Hectus with wide-eyed amazement. I mean, she seems like a lovely girl and all that, but, well, she's still one of the enemy. She's a Grochukan.
What does it matter where she comes from? I replied. It ain't her fault the Empire invaded us. You mark my words, Hectus. She'll be back here in an hour or so, and she'll give us all the help we need. As predicted, Felicia returned some 55 minutes later, and what's more, she had smuggled us a piece of the most delicious apple and blackberry crumble. What a diamond she really is. Unfortunately, she didn't agree to unlock our cell or anything like that, but she did say she'd go over to the Parched and Peckish in the morning. She didn't seem to be in much of a hurry to get back to the ball. I think she told the Troop she had a headache, and as it turned out, we ended up talking together for half the night, while Hectus dozed in the corner. We must have chatted about pretty much everything under the sun, and I must admit I felt somewhat forlorn when she finally decided she'd better go. She really is the most enjoyable company.
I didn't get all that much sleep that night, if I'm honest. I just couldn't get Felicia out of my head. Somehow or other, in the brief space of time I'd known her, she'd burnt her way deep into my heart and was unlocking feelings I didn't know I was capable of. It was quite unlike anything I'd ever experienced before. I've never been much of a feelings and emotions chap, but try as I might, I simply couldn't stop myself from thinking about her and longing for her return.
"On your feet, lads, on your feet," called an unfamiliar voice the following morning. "It's time for your showers." A Macarian soldier with a thick black beard had entered the corridor and was approaching our cell. "Clean, healthy and tidy is how we like our prisoners," he said. "I expect you'll be wanting some breakfast and all. Follow me, lads, follow me." "What's going to happen to us then?" I asked him. "You'll have a trial the day after tomorrow," said the soldier. "And assuming you're found guilty, you'll be transferred to the king's prison." "Will we get an advocate?" I inquired. "To be sure, lad, to be sure," said the soldier. "Fair, right, and proper is how we do things in Macaria. You won't need to worry about that. Quick about it, lads, quick about it. Off to the showers."
"Now's our chance," I whispered to Hectus. "Let's see if we can pick up something useful on our way." I found my shower to be most invigorating, and the breakfast that followed was the heartiest, tastiest breakfast a man could wish for. The highlight of the trip, though, was the opportunity to accumulate a few odds and ends along the way, which I carefully concealed in my jacket. All in all, I managed to procure an iron nail, a piece of string, a bar of soap, a coat hanger, a bag of coins, and a couple of clothes pegs. Yes, my pocketing talents almost beg a belief. Upon our return, we discovered Miss Felicia waiting for us in the corridor.
"Morning, Miss Felicia," said the soldier. "You'll be wanting to talk to your clients, I expect."
"Clients?" I said inquiringly.
"Miss Felicia here has volunteered to be your advocate,"
explained the soldier.
"She said she knew you from the Empire."
"Advocate?" I said with a puzzled expression as the soldier exited the corridor. "Gives me an excuse to come here," said Felicia. "And, well, decide whether to help you escape or not."
"Ah,"
I said with a grin. "That sounds promising. Have you been to the Parched and Peckish yet?" "I went this morning," she replied, "but there was no sign of your friends. I asked the desk and everything, but not a single trace of them." "Charming!" I exclaimed. "They must have gone without us." "I'm sure the General wouldn't leave us behind," said Hectus. "Nor would Mr. McFiber. Maybe they're trying to track us down." "Let's hope so," I said. "In the meantime, we'd better start planning an escape ourselves. What'll it take to persuade you to lend us a hand, Felicia?" "I'm worried what'll happen if I'm caught," she said. "If the Troop finds out I've abused his hospitality like that, well, it doesn't bear thinking about. He's got a foul temper on him." "What you need is an alibi," I said. "If you were indisputably in another place at the time when we escape, you'd be above suspicion, wouldn't you?" "I suppose," she said, looking a little doubtful. "How about this?" I said. "How about you supply us with the key now, but we don't actually break out until later? We could wait till an agreed time, couldn't we? Say midday. You'll be having lunch with all those dignitaries around about then, won't you? Chances are you'll be in exactly the same room as the Troop. They'll assume it's our partners on the outside or something. They'd have absolutely no reason to suspect you, would they? What do you say, Felicia?" "I don't know," she said, looking down at her feet. She hesitated, glanced down the corridor, and quietly closed the door. Then she looked at me straight in the eye, tried to suppress a smile, and shook her head in disbelief. "You'll be the ruin of me, Mr. Quilk," she said, breaking into a full smile. "I used to be such a decent, respectable girl, and look at me now. But I don't like to think of you rotting in a Macarian jail, and you're sure to be found guilty. I'll do it on one condition." "Oh, yes," I said, hope mounting inside me. "What's that?" "No more stealing," she said firmly. "You must promise me you'll never steal another thing." "Smashing," I beamed, grinning from ear to ear. "You're an absolute diamond, Felicia. You can rely on me for sure. My stealing days are over." I gazed in delight at the extraordinary and remarkable woman standing before me, and I was utterly transfixed by her smile. At that precise moment, as she continued to stand there all dazzling and radiant and beautiful, I felt something strong, intense and powerful stirring deep within my heart. She really was an astonishing girl. She reached into her bag, retrieved a small silver key, and pushed it through the bars. "Midday," she said, looking at me seriously. "Not a minute before." "I can't persuade you to come with us?" I asked. "I can't go to Gallimenia," she insisted. "I'm a Grotchuken Quilk. I'd be slain on sight." As she said those words, a potent mixture of anger, sorrow, and frustration began to swell up within me. Anger at the thought of anyone daring to lay a finger on her. Sorrow at the thought I might never set eyes on her again. And frustration that there was no conceivable way that we could ever be together. It all seemed so unfair. I bit my lip and looked intently into her eyes. "Goodbye then, Felicia," I said. "I hope—" "Yes?" she said expectantly. No, it doesn't matter," I said. I was just going to say, I hope our paths cross again one day." She paused, looked down at the ground, swallowed hard, and met my gaze once again. "Me too," she whispered softly. "Good luck, Mr. Quilk." And with that she vanished from sight. I was left feeling a strange concoction of emotions, the like of which I had never experienced before. I couldn't make up my mind whether I was glad or not that I'd soon be on my way out. Part of me was overjoyed that escape seemed almost certain, but the other part was reluctant to leave the palace behind. I didn't want to leave without Felicia.
Hectus and I sat there on the ground, playing a game of cards to pass the time. My thoughts were preoccupied with Miss Felicia and our imminent escape, so there wasn't much conversation between us. At long last, Hector's time-teller announced that it was the 7th hour, midday, and so we began. Slowly and carefully I unlocked the door of the cell and crept out into the corridor. I peered down one way and gazed down the other, and there was nobody about. Everything was remarkably quiet and still. "Which way do you reckon?" I whispered to Hectus.
"Through this door," said Hectus. "That's where Miss Felicia always comes from."
"Might be quieter the other way," I said. "There's no way of knowing, really. We'll go your way, mate. Tread carefully." As noiselessly as possible, we began to pick our way through the maze of passageways that lay beyond, hoping that sooner or later we'd find a clue to the whereabouts of an exit. Every so often we'd hear footsteps approaching, and would quickly take cover behind whatever curtains or furniture we could find. We had to stop frequently and retrace our steps, and after 45 minutes or so it seemed that we had made little progress. As we lingered in a creaky old corridor lined with portraits, wondering which way to go next, we heard some voices, at least 3 or 4 of them, speaking loudly and clearly and getting closer all the time. We dived through a half-open doorway and into a dusty old chamber with a long metal table down the middle. Unfortunately, this seemed to be exactly the room where the voices were heading, so we jumped into an old wooden cupboard and closed the door almost fully, leaving just the smallest crack for us to see through. 4 men entered the room and sat down around the table. 2 of them were Macarians, one of them the Truke, judging by his spotless white robes, the other a prince. The other 2 were Grotchukens, an old general, indicated by the purple feathers in his helmet, and a tall aristocrat with a long grey cloak and a snooty expression on his face. I was completely stumped as to what 2 Grotchukens might be doing in the palace of a Truke.
"Where shall we start?" said the Truke, his voice slow and melodious.
"Let's start with some brutal honesty,"
said the Grotchuken general.
"We will set our position very plainly before you, your magnificence. The war does not go well for us. Mighty though our forces may be, we simply cannot resist the armies of Gallimenia, Maduria, and Boromia combined. We have had devastating air raids from above. We have sustained heavy losses in the battles of the sea. On the land, the Gallimines have gained much ground in recent days, and are pushing their way steadily to kingdom. A scheme of the Emperor's son has failed disastrously, and many of our spies have been unmasked and captured. The Emperor is extremely worried. A few more weeks, and all could be lost."
"You paint a bleak picture," said the Trook. "I had not realized you were in quite such a precarious position."
"Why do you not seek peace?" asked the Makarian prince. "Could you not call a truce with your enemies, and end the war peacefully and amicably?"
"Not while our enemies have the upper hand, your highness," said the general. "We would have to make far too many concessions in any peace treaty. The foreign armies must be fully routed from the empire, even if we must abandon any hope of taking their lands for ourselves."
"What we need, your highness, is an injection of new blood,"
said the Grotrukan aristocrat.
"We need more soldiers, fresh, fierce and ferocious in battle. That is why we have come to you. We would like to forge a bold new alliance."
"A bold new alliance, eh?" said the Trook, raising his eyebrows. "And what would Macaria gain from such a partnership?"
"The list of benefits is innumerable," said the general. "We are not unaware of Macaria's crumbling economy, your magnificence. The empire could offer you economic prosperity, vibrant trade, and all the wealth and resources of Rovania."
"You offer us money?" said the prince, almost choking on his coffee. "You think that you can buy our support with offers of financial prosperity? You think we would trade the lives of our countrymen for a bit of silver and gold?"
"Do excuse his royal highness," said the Trook with a smirk. "I'm afraid he's one of those wishy-washy, airy-fairy, namby-pamby liberals."
"If by that," replied the prince, "you mean an open-minded, free-thinking, warm-hearted reformer, I heartily accept the compliment. His magnificence, on the other hand, is a cold, hard, rigid, stuck-in-the-mud traditionalist."
"Tradition is what's made this country great, you burbling buffoon," said the Trook. "Stout heart, strong stomach, and plenty of military muscle. That's what has kept this country going."
"Compassion, understanding, dialogue, compromise, these are the weapons of the 13th century, said the prince. "We're not in the Chaldean ages now, your magnificence. Primitive barbarism is a thing of the past."
"I do apologize for my faint-hearted, lily-livered, feeble-stomached friend," said the Trook. "He suffers from an overactive conscience and frequent bouts of lunacy. Swords, spears, arrows, and cannons, those are the only weapons people understand. Besides, your highness, think about the boost to our ailing economy. Aren't you always droning on about our poverty and squalor? Here's a golden opportunity to put an end to it once and for all. Think how many millions we could gain from the empire."
"Is 1,000,000 golds worth the loss of Macarian lives?" asked the prince. "You put a very low value on the blood of our countrymen. What good is a ton of gold in a dead man's pocket?"
"I beg your pardon for the inane outburst of my elevated friend," said the Trook. "Rest assured he does not represent the Macarian majority. You can fully rely on our unequivocal support. A decent little war will do this country the world of good."
"But what if things escalate further?" asked the prince. "What if other kingdoms join in the struggle? What of Algan Calad? What if they were to rise to the aid of the Galamenes?"
"Algan Calad," said the general in a scoffing tone. "You need not worry about Algan Calad. Since when have they ever concerned themselves with the affairs of other kingdoms? A land of centaurs, Torbrons, and two-headed giants. You need not worry yourself about them."
"How soon can you confirm your support?" asked the tall aristocrat.
"Well, it will have to go before the royal court," said the Trook. "I'm sure his highness will give a stirring speech in opposition, but there shouldn't be a problem passing the motion. We can give you our formal support by the end of the week, but we can start making plans right away, General. Perhaps a meeting with the Macarian Marshal is in order."
"Tremendous," said the general. "The Empire is extremely grateful."
"Father shall hear of this at once," said the prince. "He won't be happy when he hears you've gone behind his back."
"Your father cares for nothing as long as his table is laden with the finest delicacies," laughed the Trook. "A pleasure doing business with you, General Vralin."
"Business?" cried the prince. "You call the sacrifice of innocent lives an act of business? I am horrified."
"Allow me to offer some refreshments, Lord Svalde," said the Trook. "I'll take you to the banqueting hall."
"Wait a minute," said the aristocrat, presumably Lord Svalde. "I have an uncomfortable feeling we're not alone." It seemed our luck had run dry. Half a minute later, the door of the cupboard was flung wide open, and we felt our collars being grabbed by General Vralin.
"Spies!"
he cried in a tone of contempt.
"Dirty, skulking spies!"
"Must have been your heavy breathing," I said to Hectus, perhaps a little unfairly.
"You're not making a very persuasive case for your innocence," said the Trook. "Listening in to a highly secret council? Well, that's a capital offence if ever there was one. We shall have to put a permanent guard on you now. Would you mind keeping hold of them, General? I'll go and get my soldiers. Please do accept my sincerest apologies, General. This is profoundly embarrassing."
In a matter of minutes, Hectus and I were hurled back into our holding cell, and the black-bearded soldier was posted outside to keep watch on us.
"There'll be no escaping now, gentlemen," said the guard as he sat down at his table and put his feet up. "Safe, secure, and highly protected is how we like our prisoners. I don't think there's much chance of you winning your court case now, gentlemen. It'll be the gallows for you two. You wait and see."
"Looks like we're well and truly done for now," whispered Hectus. "It ain't over yet, mate," I replied. "Remember, you're in the company of Magpie Quilk. Determination can get you almost anywhere." "I don't see how we're going to get out of this one," said Hectus. "Not with that soldier watching us." "We'll think of something, mate," I said. "There's bound to be some way out of here." "I'm scared, Mr. Quilk," he admitted. "Positive thinking, Hectus," I said. "Even if we can't get out of here by ourselves, there's still old Monty and the others. They'll track us down sooner or later, won't they? They'll be able to corroborate our story. It'll prove we're not spies. You need to focus your mind on something else, mate. Think about your home and your family and your Amarella. You'll get back to them soon, mate. You mark my words."
The rest of the afternoon passed with excruciating dullness, and there was no sign whatever of the lovely Miss Felicia. Then, at about the first hour of the evening, I noticed that our guard had dropped off to sleep. This was our golden opportunity. "Look lively, mate," I said to Hectus, rousing him from his daydreams. "Old Blackbeard's dozed off to the land of slumber. Time for another stab at getting out of here, methinks." "But we haven't got the key any more," objected my companion. "That's no obstacle for yours truly," I bragged. "I've still got that coat hanger in the corner of the cell. I left it under my coat. With a little bit of luck, I may just be able to pick the soldier's pocket." "You never reach it," said Hectus, ever the encourager. "Besides, what if you wake him?" "Got to be worth a try," I answered, straightening out the coat hanger. "We'd better be quick, though. He might stir any minute." Without delay, I reached through the cell door with the coat hanger and strained every muscle in my arm and shoulder to get it as close as possible to the soldier's pocket. "I can't quite reach it," I groaned, almost stretching my arm out of its socket. "I'm only an inch or two short, though." "Why don't you put an iron nail on the end?" suggested Hectus, making his first helpful contribution. "You can tie it on with that string." "Good thinking, mate," I said, bringing my arm back through the bars. I carefully secured the iron nail onto the end of the coat hanger, took a deep breath, and started attempt number 2. With sweat gushing from every pore of my body, I just about managed to poke the point of the nail into the soldier's pocket and began fishing around for the key ring. I winced with every jangle made by the keys and wondered how in Gamvor I'd ever managed to get them out without arousing the soldier. I stopped for half a minute to catch my breath, then made one final heroic effort to obtain the coveted metalwork. "Got 'em!" I cried in triumph, as loudly as I dared given the circumstances. Now for the hard part. I've got to pull them in here without dropping them.
With painstaking, agonising slowness, I inched my rudimentary key grabber back through the cell door and grasped hold of our treasure with glee and delight.
Well done, Mr. Quilk,
whispered Hector's in understandable admiration.
You've done it.
What did I tell you, mate? I replied. A little determination, that's all you need. Now then, we don't want to make the same mistake as last time, do we? We don't want to end up getting lost in all them corridors.
Shall we go the other way, then?
asked Hector's. No, I said. All we need to do is find Felicia's room. Piecing together one or two things she's told me, I reckon I'll be able to find it without much bother. She'll be able to tell us how to get out of this place, won't she?
I hope so, said Hector's. We don't want to get caught a third time.
Right then, I said. Let's unlock this door and get ourselves out of here. I quickly checked there were no footsteps coming in our direction. Then I started turning the key as quietly as I could. Carefully does it, mate, I whispered to myself.
He's stirring, Mr. Quilk, he's stirring,
warned Hector's in a panic.
No, he ain't,
I said, glancing over at the soldier.
Just a momentary twitch. Keep yourself calm, mate.
There we are. Piece of cake. Off we go then. Once again, Hector's and myself crept silently out of the cell and scurried off down the corridor. Time would not be on our side with this attempt. As soon as the soldier awoke, the hunt would be on. We opted for speed over stealth and dashed through the corridors as fast as we could. Up these stairs, I reckon, I told Hector's, beginning to mount them. She says she can see over the palace wall from her bedroom. Quickly does it, mate. We ain't got all day. It wasn't long before I had successfully located a room that perfectly matched the description given by Felicia. I knocked on the door, heard her voice, and stepped boldly inside. To say that she was a little taken aback to see me would be something of an extreme understatement.
"Quilk!" she cried. "How did you get out?"
"Skill, talent, daring and ingenuity," I grinned, with just the smallest dash of luck added into the mix.
"I've been worried sick about you," she said. "The Trook is absolutely livid. He's determined to have the pair of you hanged."
"So I gather," I replied. "I was hoping we might have had a visit."
"I couldn't," said Felicia sadly. "Not with that soldier posted outside. The Trook says you can't have an advocate any more. I haven't been idle, though. I've been trying to track down the general. Thought he might be able to make a deal with the Trook."
"Any success?" I asked.
"Not yet," she said. "Can't find him anywhere."
"Now then, Felicia," I said, "is there any way for us to get out of this place?" She hesitated and looked down at the ground.
"There is one possibility," she said. "Downstairs there's a shed full of carts and carriages. Perhaps you could smuggle yourselves in one of those and I could drive you out of the palace."
"Sounds terrific," I said. "Did you hear that, Hector's? Felicia's going to get us out of here."
"Quilk," said
Felicia, fixing me intently with her incredible ebullient eyes.
"I'm so glad you got out of the cell. I really am. I couldn't bear to think of you being, well, you know, I've been so worried about you."
"Yeah, well, I'm safe now, thanks to you," I said, smiling and looking back into her eyes. "You've been absolutely tremendous."
"We'd better move fast, hadn't we?" said Hector's, coming into the room. "The soldier's bound to wake up sooner or later."
"I suppose you're right," I said, reluctantly drawing my gaze from Felicia. "We'd best get a move on." Using the quietest possible route, Felicia led us through the twisting passages of the palace and out into a little courtyard. Once she had made sure that nobody was looking, she opened the door of a large wooden building and beckoned us inside.
"Here we are," she said. "The Trook's private collection."
"Stone me to death," I said, looking round at all the carts and wagons. "He's certainly got himself quite a fleet."
"He uses them to send out all his merchandise," she explained. "There's an awful lot of produce grown in the palace gardens. His vineyards are famous all over Ganvor."
"Surprised he can grow much in this climate," I commented. "Well, you really are a diamond, Felicia. A real diamond."
"You two hide yourselves in one of these carts," said Felicia. "I'll see if I can find us a horse."
"You sure you can drive one of these?" I asked.
"I'm a woman of many talents, Quilk," she smiled. "You just get yourself hidden and keep out of sight."
Hector's and I scrambled up into the nearest cart and concealed ourselves under a large green tarpaulin. "Wonderful, ain't she?" I said to Hector's. "We'll be out of here in no time."
"You like her quite a lot, don't you, Mr. Quilk?" he replied.
"Well," I said, hesitating ever so slightly, She's an astonishing woman, Hectus. I've never met anyone quite like her. But, well, you know, her being a Groteshuken and me being a Galamine, I don't think anything could ever come of it." "Maybe things will be different once this war's all finished," said Hectus. "Maybe, Hectus, maybe," I said wistfully. "You can only dream." "I'm back," called Felicia. "I'm just opening the main door. Brace yourselves." A few moments later, the cart jolted into action with a creak and a groan, and we trundled off out of the warehouse. We hadn't gone very far when we heard the voice of a soldier, and the cart came to a sudden halt. I guessed we'd reached the main gate of the palace.
"And where might you be off to, miss?"
asked a gruff voice. "Delivering grapes to the Groteshuken ambassador," said Felicia. "There's a big feast on at the embassy tonight."
"Best let you out then, I suppose," said the soldier. "Open the gate, Raskin."
We were through. Yet another successful escape could be added to my record. My ability to get out of sticky situations almost beggars belief. The delightful Miss Felicia continued to drive us along in the cart for another 100 yards or so, and then she brought it to a halt a good safe distance from the palace. "All clear," she said, dismounting from the front and lifting up the tarpaulin. "You can come out now." "Thank you very much, Miss Felicia," said Hectus, clambering out of the cart. "Yeah, we couldn't have done it without you," I said. "Well, how about it then, Felicia? What do you say? You don't want to be stuck in this miserable town for the rest of the war, do you? Why don't you come along with us? We'll take you to Galamania." Felicia looked down at the ground and shook her head. "I can't," she said, somewhat reluctantly. "It's impossible. Makara is the only safe place for me to be. Honestly, Quilk, it's impossible." But, I stammered, lost for words for the first time in my life. "I can't bear to leave you behind." "I'm sorry," she said sadly. "It's just not possible." She clutched hold of my hand and squeezed it tightly. "I'm so glad you're safe, Mr. Quilk," she said, fixing her eyes upon mine. "Maybe one day, maybe we'll come across each other again, and, I don't know, maybe things will work out differently then." "I'd like that," I said. "I'd like that very much." "You'd better go now," she said. "They're bound to be out looking for you by now. You take this cart out of the town and head for Kilkarner on the border. There should be signposts along the way. I'll see if I can find your general and tell him where you've gone. I'm sure I'll find him eventually. You get away from here as fast as you can." "Goodbye, Felicia," I said, gazing deeply into her brilliant eyes. "Goodbye, Quilk," she returns, looking at me with a mixture of sadness and affection. I cannot tell you how hard it was to tear myself away from that most remarkable of women. Although I hadn't exactly known her for any great length of time, I have to admit I had fallen well and truly head over heels in love with her. There was something about her that completely enthralled and delighted me. I can't really put it into words, but somehow or other she had totally and comprehensively seized hold of my heart. Ugh! I cringe as I write those words, as it sounds so slushy and sentimental. But I can't really put it any other way. Usually I groan and flinch when I hear people talking in this vein, but in some way or other it seemed to have happened to me. Magpie Quilk had been captured and bound by the mysterious forces of love. "We'd best not wait here any longer," said Hectus. "Shall I drive, Mr. Quilk?" "Yeah, all right," I replied unenthusiastically. "I suppose we'd better get a move on." And so our journey began. With as much speed as was possible, we hurried along through the desert, stopping only for a few hours' rest at a time. The heat was sweltering, the sun was blinding, and our diet was exceptionally meagre. But after 3 days of thirst, fatigue and discomfort, we had finally reached the town of Kilkarner. It was a much grander affair than Aokar, tidier streets, smarter buildings and better dressed citizens. And the first thing we looked for was a place to get some decent grub. We found a little inn near the centre of the town and tucked into a delicious feast. As I was sitting there, munching on some first-class sausages, I glanced out of the window and spied a familiar black hat just a few yards from the inn. "It's Slanky Boy," I said to Hectus. "Looks like our party's back together." We rushed outside into the street and called over our old friend the butler. "Good morning, Mr. Quilk," he replied, raising his hat. "Good morning, Mr. Hectus. It is most gratifying to see you both again. We have been conducting a diligent search for you." You met Felicia then? I said.
Indeed we did, said Slank. We were not altogether sure whether to believe her at first. She is a Grotookan after all, but at length the General elected to give her the benefit of the doubt.
Sensible fellow, I remarked.
Mr. Ramkhan managed to procure us a troop of camels, he continued, and we hastened across the desert with considerable rapidity. We arrived here a couple of hours ago. I'll take you along to the others. We're due to reconvene in a matter of minutes.
Slanky Boy took us to a little bakery on the edge of town, and one by one our old companions assembled inside the shop.
Well, 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 good to see you again, said old Monty.
We bring bad news, I'm afraid, sir, I reported. Looks like Macaria's about to join the war.
Much as I expected, said the General gravely. We'd better cross the border with the utmost urgency.
At least we're not too far from home now, said Algy. Did you manage to get us any provisions in the end, Quilk? Not a scrap, I replied. My stealing days are officially over.
I'll believe that when I see it, said Magpie Boy, cheeky fellow.
It'd be nice to have a change of climate now, won't it? Said Algy. No more of this awful heat. One more kingdom to get through, and we'll be back in dear old Galliminia.
Not that it'll be plain sailing getting through Galvia, said the Jagster. Let's hope we don't encounter any Obedines.
At least we've got a cart to ride in now, though, I said. No more trudging along on foot.
As long as we don't lose it like the last one, said Tando, ever looking on the bright side.
Well then, Ramkhan, said the General, I suggest you be our driver.
It will be an honour, General, said the Baromian.
Right then, everyone, said Monty. Gather up your things. Take us to the cart, Quilk. Take us to the cart.
There was a definite air of optimism among us as we headed off to our transport. Everyone, apart from Tando, seemed so much brighter and cheerier than when we had first entered Macaria. Galliminia seemed closer than ever before. The heat of Macaria was soon to be behind us, and all of us were safely together once again. As we climbed up into the cart and made our way to the Galvian border, part of me was filled with gladness and relief. After all, Macaria isn't the sort of country you want to stay in for any great length of time. But part of me was full of sorrow and sadness, for I was leaving behind the most magnificent woman in the whole expanse of Ganvor. For all I knew, I might never set eyes on her again. Never in all my imaginings did I ever think that I would be one to fall into such a state of emotional tumult. But there was no denying it had happened. Magpie Quilk had been overpowered by the forces of love, and he would never be the same again.